welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, welcome. Tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what happened when a wealthy merchant climbed the Corinth in ancient Corinth to visit the temple of Aphrodite, the specific prices he paid, the women he encountered, and the ritual that transformed paying for sex into an offering to a goddess. You're going to learn terms the ancient Greeks used that you've never heard before. Polyxenai, the hostesses to many strangers, Hierodolai, sacred slaves who belonged to the goddess herself, and the megalomistoi, the high-wage courtesans who could bankrupt a ship captain in a single night. In the 5th century BC, a common prostitute in the Lycaean harbor charged 1 to 3 obols, the price of a loaf of bread. But the women at the temple of Aphrodite, they started at 1 drachma and went up to 10,000. The entire voyage's profit, handed over for a single night. That's what the proverb meant. Not for every man is the voyage to Corinth. But here's the question that haunted every ancient writer who tried to explain this place. What did the word sacred actually do? Did worshippers genuinely believe sex with these women honored Aphrodite? Or did everyone understand it was just a brothel with better marketing? Because here's what makes Corinth so fascinating. They managed to convince the entire Mediterranean world that lust was worship. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You think you'd never pay a temple to arrange a sexual encounter, but you've paid for attention before. The membership where the staff knows your name before you give it. The concierge who makes the impossible happen. The first-class cabin where you're treated like the only passenger on the plane. You know what you're really buying isn't the service. It's the performance of being preferred. Of mattering. Corinth just named the product honestly. Let me take you there. It's midsummer, somewhere around 450 BC, and you're standing at the Lycaean harbor, watching your ship being dragged out of the water. The Diolkos, that's what they call this limestone trackway, is the reason Corinth exists. 6 kilometers of paved road cutting straight across the isthmus, allowing ships to avoid the 700-kilometer nightmare of sailing around the Peloponnese. Your captain paid the toll. Your cargo is being unloaded, and now you wait. The smell hits you first. Ox dung, wet wood, burning axle grease. The sound is relentless, wooden wheels grinding against stone, the rhythmic chanting of the haulers, whips cracking, harbor masters shouting in 3 different languages. Teams of oxen strain against their yokes, dragging ships mounted on massive wooden cradles along parallel grooves cut deep into the limestone. The holcos, they call the platform. Your ship is one of dozens in the queue. The wait could be days. You watch a merchant galley being dragged past, its hull creaking as it rolls over the worn stone. The men working the ropes are stripped to the waist, their backs glistening with sweat in the summer heat. They've been doing this since dawn. They'll be doing it until dark. And that's the entire business model of Corinth. The city is a waiting room with 2 harbors, Lycaean to the north, facing Italy and the west, Kentriae to the east, facing the Aegean and Asia. Every merchant, every sailor, every traveler moving between the 2 halves of the Mediterranean gets stuck here, cash in hand, with absolutely nothing to do but spend it. Corinth invented the layover economy 2,000 years before airport hotels. The taverns line the road from the harbor to the city. Inside, you can find the chamarapai, the ground beaters, as they're called. 1 obol, maybe 3 if she's young. The transaction takes minutes. She works the alleyways, the storage sheds, anywhere horizontal. No ritual, no pretense, just the basic economics of supply and captive demand. These women don't have saffron robes or golden jewelry. They don't quote poetry. They're working the same ancient calculation that still operates in every port city in the world. Sailors with money, nowhere to spend it, and basic human appetites. But that's not why you're here. Because from anywhere in this city, you can see the Corinth, a massive limestone rock rising 575 meters straight up from the plain, crowned by the temple of Aphrodite. And you've heard the stories. Everyone has. The geographer Strabo claimed the temple owned 1,000 sacred prostitutes, 1,000 women dedicated to the goddess, whose services weren't just permitted, they were holy. That number is almost certainly exaggerated. Let's pause here. Ancient writers loved the number 1,000 the way modern marketers love unlimited. It signals abundance beyond counting. But even if the real number was 100 or 50, the reputation was the product. Corinth branded itself as the place where you could buy absolution along with pleasure. Where the transaction wasn't shameful, it was devotional. And that reputation created its own reality. Sailors saved for months for a single night in Corinth. You leave the harbor district and move into the lower city. The agora spreads out before you, columns, temples, fountains. The Pyrene fountain, fed by a spring that never runs dry, where half the city comes to fill their jugs and gossip. You wash the harbor dust off your face and hands. The water is cold, even in summer. You ask directions from a pottery seller. He grins when you mention the Corinth. You have the silver for that climb? The currency here is the stater. They call it the colt because it features Pegasus on one side and Aphrodite on the other. The symbolism isn't subtle. The very money you'll spend carries the image of the goddess who'll receive it. One stater equals 3 drachmas. A skilled stonecutter makes 1 or 2 drachmas a day. You're carrying 20 staters. It felt like wealth when you boarded the ship. Now you're wondering if it's enough. The path up the Corinth starts at the edge of the city. It's not a casual stroll. It's an hour-long climb up a winding trail that switchbacks through cypress and scrub, past the city's defensive walls, through air that gets thinner and wind that gets sharper with every step. Your legs are burning. You're sweating through your chiton. The harbor smell fades, replaced by wild herbs crushed underfoot, thyme, oregano, the sharp green scent of cypress. Below you, the city shrinks. The agora becomes a cluster of rooftops. The temples become marble dots. This is the filter. The casual clients stay in the harbor. The summit is for the determined, the wealthy, or the genuinely devout. And you're starting to realize the climb itself is part of the ritual, the physical sacrifice that separates the profane world of the marketplace from whatever waits at the top. Halfway up, you pass a tomb, a monument carved with a lioness holding a ram in her claws. This is the grave of Lais, the most famous courtesan Corinth ever produced. They say she was brought here as a war captive from Sicily, sold as a child, and grew into a woman who charged 10,000 drachmas for a single night. 10,000. Enough to buy a small estate. Lais was what they called a megalomistos, a high-wage courtesan, the top of the hierarchy. Below her were the hieroduli, the sacred slaves dedicated to the temple. Below them, the olatrides, flute girls who provided music and more at symposia. And at the bottom, the chimedipai of the harbor. Same city, same goddess, wildly different prices. The symbolism of that tomb tells you everything. The lioness is the courtesan, the ram is the client, the woman with nothing becomes the predator, the man with everything becomes the prey. What would you have paid, I wonder, to be the one who could afford her? You finally reach the summit. The wind hits you immediately, steady, cool, carrying the smell of wild thyme and the sea. The view is staggering. To the north, the Corinthian Gulf stretches to the mountains of central Greece. To the south, the Saronic Gulf glitters in the afternoon sun. You can see both of Corinth's harbors from here. The entire isthmus spread out like a map. Ships look like toys from this height. The Diolkos is a thin white line scratched across the landscape. This is why Aphrodite's temple sits here. She's the protector of the crossroads, the guardian of passage. Every ship that crosses the isthmus, every merchant who makes the voyage, all of them pass beneath her gaze. The temple itself is smaller than you expected, maybe 10 meters by 16, modest, almost austere. Doric columns, clean lines. This isn't the sprawling palace of prostitution you imagined. No marble halls filled with writhing bodies. No 1,000 women visible from the entrance. The reality is more subtle than the legend. But the cult statue isn't what you expected either. She's not nude, not soft. She's wearing armor. Aphrodite Hoplesmina, the armed Aphrodite. She holds a shield in front of her like a mirror. This is a fortress goddess. The protector of the citadel blends the erotic with the martial. Desire and defense. The same goddess who receives your offering also guards the walls. You're beginning to understand. This isn't just about sex. It's about power. The power of the goddess who controls the isthmus, and the power of the city that profits from every ship that passes through. There are other buildings scattered across the precinct. Stoas, covered walkways with columns, storage rooms, and small tents and temporary structures, especially during festival season. The women don't live up here. The summit is too exposed, too cold at night, too lacking in water beyond the upper Pr0 spring. They live in the city below and commute up during festivals or by appointment. A priest approaches, middle-aged, wearing a white chiton with a purple border. He doesn't ask why you're here. Everyone who makes this climb wants the same thing. First time, you nod. The goddess welcomes you. The offering is 1 stater for the temple, and the woman's fee is negotiated directly with her. There are 7 in attendance today. Would you like to meet them? This is the moment the sacred label does its work. You're not hiring a prostitute. You're making an offering to Aphrodite, and the woman is simply the vessel through which the goddess receives your devotion. The fee you pay her is separate from the temple's cut. It's not a transaction. It's a ritual with economic components. Let's pause here. This is sophisticated branding. By splitting the payment, 1 part to the temple, 1 part to the woman, they've created psychological distance from the brothels of the harbor. Down there, you hand coins to a pimp. Up here, you're tithing to a goddess and compensating a sacred servant for her time. The tithe was for the goddess. The tip was for the woman. Ancient Greece invented the service charge. The priest leads you to a covered stoa. The 7 women are seated on benches, talking quietly among themselves. They look up as you approach. They're not what you expected. No overt nudity, no aggressive solicitation. They're dressed in chitons, dyed saffron yellow, the krokotos, the ritual color associated with Dionysian and aphrodisiac rites. Their faces are painted with white lead, lips and cheeks reddened with alkanet root, eyes lined with heavy kohl. Gold jewelry catches the light, bracelets shaped like serpents, dove-shaped earrings. The symbols of Aphrodite. One of them stands, dark hair pinned up with golden pins. She meets your eyes without the performative shyness of the harbor girls. This is a woman who's been trained in more than just physical service. I am Meleta, she says. Her voice is steady, educated, a servant of Pytho. Pytho, persuasion, Aphrodite's handmaiden, the goddess of seduction, of eloquent convincing. By calling herself a servant of Pytho, she's telling you she's not just offering her body. She's offering the art of making you feel desired. My fee is 5 drachmas, she continues. That includes wine, conversation, and the evening until the lamps are extinguished. 5 drachmas, a week's wages for a laborer. But you've come this far. You hand 1 stater to the priest. He places it in a wooden thesaurus, a treasury box, without counting it in front of you. The goddess has received her due. Melita leads you away from the stoa toward a small stone building at the edge of the precinct. Inside, it's dim and cool, a single room with a wooden bed frame strung with leather straps covered in linen. A small table holds a wine jug, 2 cups, and a bronze incense burner. She lights the incense first. Frankincense, imported from Arabia, expensive, unmistakable. The yellow tears, as the poet Pindar called them. The smoke rises, thick and resinous, filling the small space. This is the scent of the divine. Every wealthy house, every temple, every important ritual in the Greek world announces itself with this smell. The resin crackles softly as it burns, releasing that unmistakable sweetness that signals you've crossed a threshold. The goddess is present, Melita says quietly, almost to herself. The light in the room shifts as the incense smoke diffuses it, softening everything. The walls seem to recede. The sounds of the wind outside become distant. She pours wine into both cups, not the cheap stuff from the harbor taverns. This is good wine, mixed with water in the proper ratio. You drink. She drinks. The formal hospitality of Xenia, the sacred guest friendship, is being enacted. You are the Xenos, the stranger. She is the Polyxeni, the hostess to many strangers. This is the language Pindar used when he wrote about the women of Corinth in 464 BC. She removes the pins from her hair. It falls past her shoulders. She loosens the saffron chiton, not a strip tease, just the practical removal of formal clothing. Underneath, her skin is oiled, scented with something floral, roses maybe. You're nervous, she observes. Not mocking, just stating fact. You admit you are. Everyone is, the first time. They expect something different. They expect it to feel wrong. She sits beside you on the bed, close enough that you can feel the warmth of her. But this is Aphrodite's gift, the fruit of soft beauty, harvested without blame. That's what the poet said about us. She's quoting Pindar. She knows the theology of her own position, and that's the genius of the system. She believes it, or at least performs belief so convincingly that you start to believe it too. What happens next, I won't describe in mechanical detail. This isn't that kind of account, but what I will tell you is this. The encounter is neither hurried nor cold. She's performing a role, yes, but it's a role that requires making you feel seen, chosen, attended to. Her attention is entirely focused on you. Your pleasure is her proof of devotion to the goddess. What would you have paid to stay until morning? Afterward, she doesn't rush you out. You lie there in the dim room, listening to the wind outside. She refills your wine cup. How did you come to be here, you ask. She's quiet for a moment. Then, I was born a slave. My first master sold me to a merchant when I was a child. He brought me to Corinth. Years later, when I was grown, he dedicated me to Aphrodite. Dedicated? It's a kind of manumission, a sacred sale. He sold me to the goddess for 300 drachmas. I'm technically free now, Eleuthera. But I have obligations. Paramon. I owe the temple my service during festivals and when clients request me by name. In return, I keep most of my earnings, and no one can sell me again. This is the hidden machinery. The temple doesn't own 1,000 prostitutes. It owns the registry of women who've purchased their freedom through the goddess. They're freed women with a debt, not to a human master, but to Aphrodite herself. The temple takes a cut, the city's reputation grows, the women accumulate enough silver to eventually buy their way out completely. It's exploitation dressed as liberation. Or maybe it's the least bad option in a world where slavery was ubiquitous and women's bodies were property by default. How much more do you need, you ask? To be free entirely? Another 100 drachmas, maybe 2 years if I'm careful and the festivals are well attended. You do the math, 20 clients like you, 40 if she drops her price. 2 years of this room, this incense, this performance of desire. You ask how long this system has existed. She laughs softly. Since before my grandmother's grandmother, there was an Olympic champion, Xenophon of the Oligothidai, who won both the sprint and the pentathlon in the same games. Before he competed, he vowed to dedicate 100 women to Aphrodite if he won. She pauses. He won, and Pindar himself wrote a song for the dedication feast, the most respected poet in Greece, praising women like me, 100 women. That's not piety. That's a Series A funding round for the temple. What did Pindar write, you ask? She closes her eyes, reciting from memory. Young women who welcome many guests, servants of Pytho in rich Corinth, you who burn the yellow tears of fresh incense, often soaring in your thoughts to the heavenly mother of love's Aphrodite. You, O children, she has permitted to cull the fruit of soft beauty without blame in delightful acts of love. Read that again. Without blame. Anampaton in Greek. The sexual labor of these women was explicitly framed as blameless because it was sacred. because Aphrodite herself had granted permission. But even Pindar couldn't completely escape the social anxiety of what he was doing. In the same poem, he asks Aphrodite to forgive him for writing about common women in a victory ode. He knows he's crossing a line. He's just hoping the goddess and his aristocratic patron will forgive the transgression. What Xenophon did wasn't seen as depravity. It was megalopropeia, magnificence, the conspicuous display of wealth for the glory of the city and the gods. He was beautifying Corinth the way another man might dedicate a temple or sponsor a warship. The women were his votive offering, his proof of piety and status. And that tells you everything about how this system actually functioned. It wasn't a vice hidden in shadows. It was a feature of civic life, integrated into the religious calendar, celebrated by poets and practiced by the elite. The most respectable men in Corinth participated openly. Their wives knew, their colleagues knew, the entire city knew, and no one considered it shameful, because Aphrodite herself had blessed the arrangement. Before you leave, Melita walks you to the Upper Piran Spring, the natural fountain near the summit, the water source that makes the sanctuary possible. Legend says it was created by the hoof of Pegasus, the same winged horse stamped on every coin in your purse. You wash your face, your hands. The water is cold, even in summer. The ritual purification in reverse, cleansing yourself of the sacred before descending back into the profane world. She watches you go without sentiment. Tomorrow there will be another client, another stranger making the climb, another offering to the goddess. The climb down is faster than the ascent. Your legs are tired, but the path is familiar now. The city spreads below you, the agora, the diolkos, the two harbors framing the isthmus. You can hear the distant grinding of ships being dragged across land, the same sound that was there when you arrived. You pass Leigh's tomb again, the lioness and the ram. Here's what I find remarkable. Leigh was so famous, so powerful in her prime, that when she died, they gave her a tomb worthy of a general, a slave-turned courtesan, buried with honors in the Cranian district where aristocrats were laid to rest. The city that sold her body ended up celebrating her as a symbol of Corinthian wealth and sophistication. If you'd had the silver, 10,000 drachmas, the price of an estate, would you have paid it just to say you had? That's the other hidden truth of Corinth. Some women did win, not many, but enough that the dream was plausible, enough that a slave girl being dedicated to Aphrodite could imagine a future where she wasn't property. Let's pause here and confront the uncomfortable question, did they actually believe it was sacred? The honest answer is probably both yes and no simultaneously. And that's not a cop-out, it's actually the point. The Greeks didn't have our categories of sacred and profane, spiritual and commercial. Temples were banks, priests were administrators. Religion was transactional. You gave offerings to gods in exchange for favors. You sacrificed a goat and expected good weather for your voyage. You dedicated a statue and hoped the god would remember your generosity. The entire framework was already blending worship and economics in ways that would make a modern person uncomfortable. So, when a man climbed the Corinth and paid for sex at Aphrodite's temple, was he worshipping or was he purchasing a service? The answer is yes. He was doing both. The sacred label wasn't a lie, and it wasn't quite the truth. It was a frame that made the transaction socially acceptable and spiritually meaningful. Aphrodite was the goddess of sex. Her domain included physical desire, procreation, and erotic pleasure. Engaging in sex acts at her temple wasn't theologically incoherent. It was participating in her sphere of influence. The frankincense, the prayers, the ritual washing, all of it created a context where lust could be reframed as devotion. And here's where it gets remarkable. In 480 BC, during the Persian Wars, when Xerxes' fleet threatened all of Greece, the Corinthians didn't just send ships and soldiers. They sent their sacred prostitutes to pray. Think about that for a moment. The greatest military threat the Greek world had ever faced, the survival of civilization itself, hanging in the balance. And the Corinthians believed, truly believed that the prayers of their temple prostitutes could make the difference. Let's pause here. These women, sex workers, sacred slaves, whatever we call them, were credited with helping save Greek civilization. Their prayers to Aphrodite were considered spiritually powerful enough to intercede against Xerxes' fleet. That's not how you treat prostitutes. That's how you treat priestesses. The poet Simonides wrote an epigram commemorating it. These women stood before the temple of Aphrodite and prayed to the goddess to implant in the Greeks the desire to defend Greece, and Aphrodite did not betray them. The city credited their prayers with helping to save Greece. These weren't just sex workers. They were recognized as having spiritual power, as being capable of interceding with the goddess on behalf of the entire polis. So what happened? Why did sacred prostitution disappear? In 146 BC, the Romans destroyed Corinth completely. They killed the men, enslaved the women and children, and burned the city to the ground. It was Rome's punishment for Corinth's role in the Achaean League's resistance. The general Mummius ordered the city razed. The art was shipped to Rome. The population was sold at auction. For 100 years, the site was abandoned, a ghost city, its temples empty, its famous harbor silent. The women of Aphrodite's temple would have been sold alongside everyone else. The sacred label offered no protection from Roman swords. When Julius Caesar refounded it as a Roman colony in 44 BC, it was a different place. Roman morality was different. The new colonists were Roman veterans and freedmen, not Greek aristocrats. The temple of Aphrodite was rebuilt, but the sacred prostitution system was gone. By the time the geographer Strabo visited in the 1st century AD and wrote about the 1,000 sacred prostitutes, he was describing a memory, the old Greek Corinth that his sources remembered, and he wrote about it the way Romans wrote about Greek excess, with a mix of fascination and moral superiority. The system died because the culture that created it died. The Romans had their own brothels, their own courtesans, their own arrangements. But they didn't frame it as worship. They didn't climb mountains to make offerings to Venus. For them, sex was either a domestic duty or a private vice, never a public sacrament. But here's what I keep coming back to, the question of honesty. In Corinth, if you wanted sex, you paid for it. The transaction was explicit. The prices were known. There was no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. The sacred label didn't hide the commerce. It sanctioned it. Compare that to the elaborate performances we construct today. The dinner that costs more than Melita's 5 drachmas. The gifts that accumulate into unspoken obligation. The apps where the transaction is mediated through enough layers of fiction that we can pretend it's not really about exchange. The careful choreography of modern courtship, where everyone knows the steps, but no one admits the music is playing. We've gotten better at hiding the transaction. Whether that's progress is above my pay grade, but I know which system I'd rather navigate, the one where the price is posted and the incense is already burning. The temple of Aphrodite offered something we've lost, the ability to acknowledge desire without shame and commerce without pretense. You climbed a mountain, burned incense, paid silver stamped with the goddess's face, and received exactly what you came for. No apology, no moralizing, just the frank acknowledgement that humans want sex. Some people will sell it. And if you're going to do it anyway, you might as well make it beautiful. That's what the saffron robes were for. The gold jewelry, the frankincense, the poetry, the ritual washing. None of it changed the fundamental transaction, but it elevated it. It made it art. And maybe that's the answer to our central question. The word sacred didn't make the prostitution disappear. It transformed it into something the culture could accept, celebrate, and integrate into civic life. It was brilliant marketing, yes, but it was also genuine theology. Aphrodite was the goddess of pleasure, and pleasure, when properly framed, properly compensated, properly ritualized, was holy. The voyage to Corinth wasn't just about sex. It was about living in a world where your desires weren't sins to be confessed, but offerings to be celebrated. Where the woman who took your silver wore the goddess's symbols, and called herself a servant of persuasion. Where the climb up the mountain was a pilgrimage, and the descent was a return to the ordinary world, carrying the memory of an hour when lust and worship were the same thing. That world is gone. The Corinth still stands. You can hike it today, follow the same path those ancient visitors climbed, but the temple of Aphrodite is ruins. Melita saved her 100 drachmas, or she didn't. Lais died and got her lioness monument. Xenophon's 100 women were forgotten, except in Pindar's fragments. The priests who collected the temple's cut, the merchants who spent their voyage's profits, the sailors who saved for months for a single night, all of them dust. What remains is the question they answered with such confidence. Can desire be sacred? They said yes, and for 700 years, the smoke of frankincense rose from the Corinth, carrying prayers to a goddess who loved pleasure and received it as worship. Maybe they were lying to themselves, or maybe they understood something about the relationship between the body and the divine that we've forgotten. Either way, it's worth the climb to find out.